So now that we've created all of our actors, what we can do next is create our scene, which is where everything in the game is going to happen. You can create multiple scenes, so don't worry if you're, you know, worried that that sounds like you're only going to have one space to work in. You can create as many as you want. So if I open this up here, there's a bunch of different stuff that I'm going to see here. So the first thing that we need to fill out is just the name. So I'm going to oh, whoops. Sorry about that. I'm used to doing that process very quickly. So let me just quickly delete that and do that again. So level. Now what you should find is that depending on what size you've set the game to be, the width and height of your scene should match the the size that you set when you began, building the game, or when you've changed it in settings. Now, what it'll do is it'll do it to the nearest 32. So, for example, if you do something that doesn't work in powers of 32, or whatever you've set the tile width for, then it'll just get to the nearest one it can. I'll go into tiles in another video. We don't need to worry about those for now, because that's for things like terrain. If you're wanting the if you're wanting the character to move in an area outside of the view of the camera, you would extend the width of the screen. Sorry, the width of the scene. There's a very kind of fundamental difference between the screen size and the scene size, because the camera can always move into other areas within the scene, but once the game's running, you can't alter the screen size. So the only other thing you can do now is add a color for the background, but we don't need to worry about that because we've got the color for the background added in. But just to be sure, we're going to set it to black. Click Create. So now, if I go to Actors, you can see here, if I just zoom in, that I can add in all my actors I've created. What we'll do first is we'll look at the tools that we've got available here. So the first one is the mouse, which allows you to select, click and drag and move stuff around the scene. We have the pen tool, or the create tool, which allows you to kind of create all sorts of stuff. If you just hold and click, you can create lots, or just one click to create one thing at a time. This is primarily to be used with tiles, so we'll cover that in another one, and it's the same with flood fill as well. These are for changing the number of columns in the scene, so if you wanted to quickly add in a couple of extra sections to your scene, you could just do that by using this, rather than having to go back into properties and changing it and kind of guessing how wide you need it to be. So I'm just going to go back and quickly change that. You've got joints and sockets and stuff like that. That stuff is a bit advanced, so we'd come to that probably at a later point. Regions we don't need to talk about in this demo, but what I will kind of say is, is that it's quite useful for if you want, for example, an area of your screen to trigger something. It doesn't have to be attached to a character, that trigger. So you could say if we use the example of something like football, if the football enters the region of the goal, then initiate win state, or increase score by 1. That would be an example of a region in the real world, or in the world of football. Then you've got terrain, which is kind of creating physical space, things in the level that you can bump into that aren't necessarily objects. And then you've got zoom in and zoom out. Then what else do we have? We've got layer mode, which we'll go into in a sec, and then you've got the working mode, which determines what you want to be able to interact with. So, for example, if you have a level that's just filled with a certain type of something, but you don't want to touch it. So for example, if you wanted to just work with actors, you could set it to just be just actors that you can work with. That will probably be more relevant in the other tutorial that I'm going to be doing about triggers. So yeah, we'll come back to that at a later point. But for now, let's focus on getting stuff into the level. So first things first, let's get our background in. Now, if we come down to this area here, you have your layers, and if you click down here on this little plus, you'll be able to add a new background layer. So there's a difference between a tile layer and a background layer. A background layer is essentially locked, and you can't make any alterations to it except change what the background is. A tile layer is what you would essentially create all of your characters on, your enemies on, your blocks, everything would be on that layer. And so yeah, let's add the background in. So space. Now if I try and add stuff to the scene now, it won't let me. Now the reason for that is because we're on the background layer, and you can see there's a padlock here, which means that we can't interact with it. And you can also see that even if I go to this layer, it doesn't appear to be letting me do anything. That is because this is below the background. So if we move this down one, you can see the stuff I've been creating is on this background layer. It's quite useful, you know. You'll find when you're trying to kind of have like being able to dynamically change the layerings of the backgrounds and stuff is quite useful. But let's get some objects in the scene. So if I just click on my spaceship, I can bring it into the scene and just plonk it down. Now my plan for these three objects, I can just put them in just to show you, but my plan for these objects is to create them randomly. But what I'm going to show you for now is some features of kind of in the scene features. So for example, if I just put a couple of these in here, I can also hold shift and it will lock these actors to the grid, the 32 by 32 grid, which I can toggle up here, which is good to know. If you want to delete a lot of characters at once, you can click and drag and delete them. And if you want the characters by default to snap to the grid, you can click on the magnet tool and toggle it, and that way they'll always snap to the grid. So that should be good for now. So next, what we will cover is getting started with some very, very basic code for our character, getting it to move left and right by rotation, and then potentially seeing if we can move it forwards